My husband used to tell people I was too quiet. At first, I laughed it off. I thought he meant I was calm, thoughtful, the kind of person who listened more than she talked. But over time, I realized he didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant I was easy to ignore. My name is Emily. I was 36, living in North Carolina, and married to Daniel for 18 years. We had 2 children, a comfortable house, stable jobs, and a life that looked perfectly normal from the outside. Inside our home, something much harder to explain had been growing. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't cruelty. It was something quieter. Every opinion I shared somehow became unimportant. Every concern became overthinking. Every dream became not realistic. Daniel had a way of making me doubt myself without ever raising his voice. If I suggested taking a family vacation somewhere different, he'd smile politely and say, "Let's stick with my plan." If I questioned a financial decision, he'd answer, "You don't really understand investments." If I tried to explain how hurt I felt, he'd sigh and say, "You're being emotional again." Little by little, I stopped speaking, not because I had nothing to say, because I believed nobody wanted to hear it. Friends noticed. "You've gotten quieter," one of them mentioned during lunch. I smiled. "I'm just tired." That became my answer for everything. Then came Daniel's company anniversary dinner. It was held at a beautiful hotel downtown. Everyone was dressed up. People laughed. Music played softly in the background. I stood beside Daniel while he introduced me to coworkers I had never met. One woman smiled warmly. "So, Emily, what do you enjoy doing?" Before I could answer, Daniel laughed. "She doesn't really say much." Everyone chuckled politely. Then he added something I'll never forget. "She's happiest when she just lets me make the decisions." People smiled awkwardly. Someone changed the subject. I smiled too, because I didn't know what else to do, but something inside me became very still. Driving home, Daniel talked about how successful the evening had been. I barely spoke. For the first time in years, my silence wasn't fear. It was clarity. The next morning, I looked around our kitchen while drinking coffee. I realized I had spent years trying to prove my worth to someone who had already decided not to see it. That realization hurt. But it also felt strangely peaceful. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. I stopped asking for permission to have opinions. Instead, I started paying attention. I reviewed our finances. I organized important documents. I reopened the savings account I had abandoned years earlier. Every paycheck, I quietly deposited a small amount. Nothing secretive, nothing dishonest, just something that belonged to me. I also enrolled in an evening certification program connected to my career. Daniel barely noticed. When I mentioned the classes, he shrugged. "If it keeps you busy." That sentence no longer hurt. It motivated me. Over the following months, I became different. Not louder. Stronger. I read books during lunch breaks. I exercised every morning. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted away from. When someone asked my opinion, I answered without apologizing. Daniel seemed confused. "You've changed." "I've grown," I replied calmly. He laughed. "We'll see how long this lasts." For the first time, I didn't try to convince him otherwise. One Saturday, we attended a neighborhood barbecue. Several couples gathered around talking about career goals and future plans. One neighbor turned toward me. "Emily, I heard you're taking classes." I smiled. "I am." Before I could continue, Daniel interrupted. "She always starts hobbies. They never go anywhere." Everyone laughed politely, again, except this time, I didn't laugh. I looked directly at him. Then I answered in the calmest voice I'd ever used. "Actually, I finished more things than you realize." The conversation became quiet. Daniel stared at me. He wasn't angry. He looked surprised, as if he had just met someone new. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, he closed the front door and turned toward me. There was a long silence. Then he asked one question that would change everything. "Who have you been talking to?" I looked at Daniel for a moment before answering. "No one taught me this," I said quietly. "I just finally started listening to myself." He frowned, almost as if my answer disappointed him. "I don't understand." I know. For years, I had explained every feeling, every disappointment, every hope. I had searched for the perfect words that would make him understand. Now I realized understanding couldn't be forced. Respect couldn't be begged for. It had to exist willingly. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became unusually attentive. He noticed I wasn't asking where he wanted to eat. I simply chose a restaurant when it was my turn. He noticed I no longer canceled plans with friends because his schedule changed. I wished him a good evening and kept my own plans. He noticed I answered questions directly instead of apologizing before speaking. One evening, he finally said, "You don't need my approval anymore." I smiled gently. I never actually did. Those words weren't meant to hurt him. They were meant to remind myself. A month later, I completed my certification. It led to an opportunity I never expected, a promotion with better pay and more responsibility. When I shared the news with my manager, she smiled. "I've always seen leadership in you." Those words stayed with me all day. Not because they were dramatic, because no one had said anything like that to me in years. When I told Daniel, he looked surprised. "I didn't think they'd choose you." "I know." He looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean I know what you meant." For once, I didn't fill the silence to make him comfortable. A few days later, he asked if we could go for a walk. We walked through our neighborhood just before sunset. Finally, he spoke. "I think I've underestimated you." I nodded. "I think you did." "I'm sorry." Those two words mattered, but they weren't enough on their own. "I'm glad you said that," I replied. "But respect isn't built in one conversation. It's built in everyday choices." He looked down. "I don't know if I know how." "Then learn." There was no anger in my voice, only honesty. The months that followed weren't perfect. Some old habits returned. Sometimes he interrupted me. Sometimes he assumed he knew better. But something had changed. I no longer accepted it quietly. Not with arguments, not with resentment, simply with calm boundaries. I wasn't finished speaking. I see it differently. I've already made my decision. Small sentences, steady voice, no apology. Over time, Daniel started listening, not because I became louder, because I stopped disappearing. One afternoon, our daughter asked if I would help her prepare for a school presentation. She looked nervous. "What if nobody listens?" I smiled. "The right people will. And what if they don't?" "Then you still deserve to speak." As I heard those words leave my mouth, I realized I was speaking to my younger self too. Years earlier, I believed peace meant staying silent. Now I understood something different. Peace isn't losing your voice. Peace is knowing you don't have to raise it to be heard. Looking back, I don't remember the promotions or the certificates as the biggest turning point. I remember the day I stopped chasing someone's approval. That quiet decision changed every part of my life. Because self-respect doesn't begin when someone else finally sees your value. It begins the moment you do. If this story touched you, please comment and subscribe. I have one question for you. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? Let me know your answer below.